Well, the 35-member Board of Governors of the International Atomic Energy Agency has finally closed the book on nearly 12 years of dispute over Iran's nuclear program. A resolution which had the backing of the P5+1 countries ended the IAEA's probe into the past and present issues regarding Iran's nuclear program. Now, a thorny issue was the so-called possible military dimension of Iran's nuclear activities known as PMD. The closure of the PMD dossier comes in the wake of last month's assessment by the IAEA, which confirmed that Iran's nuclear program had not diverted towards any military activity. Well, the resolution was also part of a nuclear deal reached between Iran and the P5+1 countries in July. It will pave the way for the removal of nuclear-related sanctions against Iran. The Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif has welcomed the IAEA's decision to end an investigation into Tehran's past nuclear activities. Zarif said the resolution by the Board of Governors of the agency shows the peaceful nature of Iran's nuclear program.
The American-Israel Public Affairs Committee denounced on Tuesday the decision by the UN's Atomic Agency to end its probe into Iran's past nuclear weapons activities. Without a complete understanding of Iran's past nuclear weaponization efforts, the IAEA will lack a sufficient baseline to create an effective inspections and verification regime capable of assuring Iranian compliance with the JCPOA, the IPAC statement noted, adding that it is impossible to estimate how long it will take Iran to assemble a nuclear weapon to break out so long as the full state of its weaponization efforts remains unknown. The top American diplomat, Secretary of State John Kerry, on Tuesday welcomed the UN nuclear watchdog's decision to close its probe into whether Iran had developed nuclear weapons in the past. Closing the possible military dimensions agenda item will in no way preclude the IAEA from investigating if there is reason to believe Iran is pursuing any covert nuclear activities in the future, as it had in the past, Kerry said, according to Reuters, adding the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action improved the agency's ability to monitor Iran.
Well, wherever they originated, they shut down more than 1,000 schools in LA. The school district second in population only to New York and covering 710 square miles. Here's Ben Tracy.
All LAUSD schools have been shut down today. Please do not bring your children.
The robocall alert from the nation's second largest school district went out at 6:32 a.m., idling hundreds of school buses and stopping parents and more than 640,000 students in their tracks. Nicole Skate's son Donovan is in second grade.
Kind of scared, but, my immediate thought was just how I was going to talk to him about it.
11-year-old Sullivan Montague heard the news from her dad.
He told me that it was a threat, possibly a bomb, and I got kind of nervous.
Los Angeles Unified School District Superintendent Ramon Cortines said he was comfortable with his decision.
Somebody has sent information that leads us to pause and make sure that we are safe, that our children and our staff are safe.
Hundreds of law enforcement officers were deployed to campuses. Police secured buildings, armored vehicles were mobilized, and every school in the district would be searched.
They're leaning toward a hoax in Los Angeles, and the one here in New York City had clues early on, leading them to believe this was not the real thing. ABC's chief investigative correspondent Brian Ross tonight with what was said in the threat and what led authorities to leave schools here open instead.
The first tip-off for New York police today was that the alleged threat involving a secret jihadist terror cell, nerve gas agents, high-powered weapons, and mass casualties seemed remarkably similar to the plotline of the TV program Homeland.
The instigator of the threat may be a Homeland fan, basically watching Homeland episodes that it mirrors a lot of recent episodes on Homeland.
Police said the message sent to New York read in part, "Something big is going down." Not only are there bombs, but there are nerve gas agents set to go off at a specific time during lunch hour. New York officials said they knew immediately it was a hoax and a bad one.
It was so generic, so outlandish, and posed to numerous school systems simultaneously.
The message continued with a glaring typo. Me and my 138 comrades will die tomorrow in the name of Allah, with a lowercase a, at least in the New York version.
That would be incredible to think that any jihadist would not spell Allah with a capital A.
Los Angeles got a similar message, with the sender saying he would personally lead the attacks.
One person can't lead an attack in both cities. So they realized right then and there that it didn't have credibility.
Cut and paste job?
Definitely.
But with the pain of the San Bernardino attack still fresh in California, there was broad support today for the decision made by the Los Angeles schools to play it safe.
Now to that scary moment on that Southwest jet in Nashville, the plane rolling off the runway and into a ditch after a rough landing. This comes as millions of Americans are gearing up, of course, for holiday travel. ABC's Alex Perez is in Nashville with the latest. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Robin. That plane has been moved, but you can see it's still out here on the tarmac this morning. Passengers say they knew something went terribly wrong just seconds after landing.
Overnight, frightening moments for 133 passengers aboard this Southwest Boeing 737.
It was terrifying to feel the plane sort of bounce up and down.
Southwest Flight 31 from Houston, bound for Nashville. The jet making a rough landing at Nashville International Airport at 5:20 p.m. Just as passengers thought they were safe, the plane rolling off the runway into a ditch. Emergency crews and ambulances immediately called to the scene. Panicked passengers trying to grab bags from the overhead bins before evacuating down the jetliner's emergency chute.
They made sure that there was no fire or explosion or anything, and to make sure that everyone was able to get off quickly.
8 passengers rushed to the hospital and later released with minor injuries. Both the nose of the plane and its side suffering damage.
This morning, a California hospital is tracking down hundreds of people who may have been exposed to tuberculosis. The possible exposure affects more than 1,000 people. The list includes 350 newborns. A nurse at the Santa Clara Valley Medical Center tested positive for the potentially deadly disease. So starting today, the hospital is offering testing and treatment for those affected. Dr. David Agus is in Los Angeles with more on what makes this infection so dangerous. David, good morning to you. How serious a threat is it?
You know, it's serious. At the turn of the last century, tuberculosis was the #1 killer in the United States. It's certainly gone down dramatically to about 9,000 cases a year in the United States. But in newborns, it can be fatal. And so newborns need to be treated right away. And so they're going to be treated with a 6-month course of isoniazid, a particular antibiotic they have to take every day. Adults, they're going to wait, and they have to wait till they either show a positive test or get symptomatic, and then they'll be treated.
A major winter storm, 14 states on alert, and yet the record heat elsewhere. Look at this. In Salt Lake City, a blast of snow, trees crushing cars there. This man pushing his stranded vehicle. Here in the east, 30 degrees warmer than usual. In Washington, D.C. tonight, the cherry blossoms are out. In New York City, Christmas shopping in shorts. ABC's Gio Benitez is in Buffalo, New York tonight, where he was 1 year ago, and what a difference a year makes.
Tonight, a new storm pummeling the west, downing power lines in Salt Lake City, stranding drivers in Washington State, high winds snapping trees in the Bay Area.
She literally saw this tree just come down, and then she just heard it smash.
All this after a wild weekend of extreme weather in the heartland. A Kansas whiteout blinding drivers, and in Texas, 4 confirmed tornadoes. You can see from the air the path of destruction, at least 50 homes damaged.
And it sounded like the roof had lifted off the house.
Straight line winds doing damage too. Our Candace Gibson on the scene.
Here in Lufkin, Texas, 40-mile-an-hour winds did this, knocking over 64 freight train cars as if they were toys.
Meanwhile, the east still waiting for winter. This was the scene in Buffalo last year. The temperature right now, it feels like 1 degree. And behind me, that is a car completely buried in snow. And take a look at this spot right now. No snow. In fact, Buffalo hit a record high today of 71 degrees on a December 14th. Since the month began, more than 1,000 high temperature records tied or broken across the country. And tonight here at this ice rink, hundreds of people were expected on their skates. But just take a look. It looks more like a swimming pool. No skating here.
There is a whole lot of shaking going on in Oklahoma. The Sooner State saw 850 earthquakes of magnitude 3 or greater this year, compared to 584 in 2014 and only 109 in 2013. The trend is clear. Earthquakes are on the rise in Oklahoma, but it appears some of them could be man-made. The Oklahoma Geological Survey says the spike is due to the injection of water into the earth, water produced through oil and gas production. Restrictions on injection wells are now in place, but officials say it will take some time before they'll know if they're reducing the number of quakes.
Now to the fight against ISIS. Defense Secretary Ash Carter arriving in Turkey this morning to meet with U.S. battlefield commanders and allies. As the hunt for ISIS sympathizers here in the U.S. intensifies, the FBI arresting that Maryland man accused of supporting the terror group. And ABC's Pierre Thomas joins us now with the details. Good morning, Pierre.
Good morning, Robin. The allegations are chilling and, if true, involve an escalation in ISIS tactics, with the group trying to finance a terror plot against the homeland right here at home. The FBI claims that ISIS operatives in Egypt and Syria sent 30-year-old Mohammed El-Shenaway nearly $9,000 to, quote, conduct an attack on U.S. soil. What's more, the FBI says El-Shenaway used terrorist and spy techniques, from short-term throwaway phones to encryption, and set up his computer so it would not store any information about his activities, Robin.
Okay, that's the situation there, Pierre. What's the latest on that search of the pond in San Bernardino?
Our early guidance is that the items recovered have yet to yield anything significant from the pond in connection with the case, and authorities are still trying to find that hard drive from the couple's computer, which they hope will provide more answers.
We are hitting ISIL harder than ever. Coalition aircraft, our fighters, bombers, and drones have been increasing the pace of airstrikes, nearly 9,000 as of today. Last month in November, we dropped more bombs on ISIL targets than any other month since this campaign started. We're also taking out ISIL leaders, commanders, and killers one by one. ISIL's lost thousands of square miles of territory it once controlled in Syria, and it will lose more.
Leading American political analyst and philosopher Noam Chomsky blames the US and its Western allies for the November terrorist attacks in Paris. Chomsky has said in an interview that the US-led invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan has been the root cause of recent wave of terrorist attacks across the world. He added that terrorism, especially by the Daesh terror group, cannot be defeated by military force alone. Chomsky slammed the US strategy of launching airstrikes against Daesh targets in Iraq and Syria, saying that the strikes only increase the likelihood of large-scale terrorist attacks, similar to what happened in Paris on November the 13th. Chomsky said even if the US and its allies did manage to destroy Daesh, a more terrible militant group would emerge unless the root causes are properly addressed.
The leader of the Dutch far-right is enjoying a surge in popularity, judging by a recent poll. Geert Wilders was named Politician of the Year by viewers of the Netherlands One TV channel. With more than 37,000 people voting, he managed to see off the country's Prime Minister, could only manage 6th place in the poll. Wilders called the result a huge honour and an encouragement to fight even harder for the interests of the Dutch people. The Party of Freedom leader is known for his outspoken views on Islam and immigration.
Everywhere in Europe, the people, not the political elite, not the governments, but the people are saying enough is enough. Let us reclaim our country. Stop the mass immigration from Islamic countries. No more. We say no more to the governments and to the Islamization process.
Back in 2010, he was charged with inciting hatred in his home country. That was over his short film Fitna, which was highly critical of Islam. He was found not guilty. Then in May of this year, he was a speaker at an exhibition in Texas showing cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad. And that event was attacked by 2 gunmen who were both killed by police. And then in June of this year, Dutch TV aired a slideshow of those cartoons, and it was accompanied by this statement from Wilders.
Wat niet mag, vanwege de islam en vanwege het geweld van de terroristen, doen we toch. En dat noemen we vrijheid van meningsuiting.
We asked political activist and author Pierre Schweitzer what's behind the surge in far-right movements in the Netherlands and other EU countries.
It was a gradual process, but of course the coincidence of the migrants crisis plus the new rise of terrorism has very much accelerated things.
The traditional Muslim niqab or a burqa could now find you on the wrong side of the law. MPs from the Swiss region of Ticino have voted in favour of fining people for wearing such garments. Here's how they justified the move.
Those who rebuff our values and aim to build a parallel society based on religious laws and want to place it over our society are not welcome.
The maximum sum you could be fined for doing so is €9,200, and no exceptions will be made for tourists. Although other forms of face coverings, such as masks, balaclavas and crash helmets, will still be permitted. Police data shows that crimes against migrants have doubled in Germany this year. Those include assaults, spreading hateful messages online, as well as attacks on migrants' property and shelters. And according to research by the Die Zeit newspaper, arson attacks on refugee centres have increased tenfold from the start of the year, with 16 separate incidents last month alone.
Executive branch has announced plans to create a European Border Patrol and Coast Guard force as part of the bloc's bid to deal with the migrant and refugee crisis.
Legal entries into the Union have reached 1.5 million this year. That is almost double the total of the last 5 years. It clearly reveals a significant failure in how we manage and protect our external border.
The European Commission has proposed a force of at least 1,500 border guards. They would carry out systematic security checks on everyone entering the bloc, including EU citizens.
This means that returning foreign terrorist fighters who are European Union's citizens, like the ones who perpetrated the Paris attacks, will no longer be able to return unnoticed.
The proposed European Border and Coast Guard would have much greater powers and resources than the existing agency Frontex that assists individual member states when help is requested. But the European Commission's new border control proposals are already meeting with fierce resistance from some member states, which see them as a power grab by Brussels intended to undermine their national sovereignty. Poland says it plans to block the proposal when it comes up for discussion among European leaders meeting in the Belgian capital on Thursday. But other countries, including France and Germany, have thrown their support behind the plan. If leaders and the bloc's parliament ultimately approve the proposal, Europe would for the first time have a border protection agency that could act independently of national governments, respond to emergencies with speed, and possess its own risk assessment centre.
From Paris to San Bernardino, mass shootings are creating fear. In Northern California, some ministers and church members are signing up for firearms classes John Blackstone met the faithful on a gun range in Placerville in the state's gold country.
God-fearing, gun-toting. Those training in California's Sierra foothills were invited here by gun safety instructor Jeff Peabody.
Who are these people here today? These are all ministers. Some of them are in church security, and they come from different churches. Everybody step up right about here.
Peabody offers the class free to members of any church. He says he's trained more than 500 in the last 8 years. His graduates qualify to carry concealed weapons. Many do so in church.
Safe and saved. So we can accomplish both with the right training.
Bruce Schaff serves on a security team at his church.
Does it seem to go against the sanctity of the church in any way to be taking guns in?
Not at all, not at all. The Bible tells us to be our brother's protector. It's just another tool.
Micah Anderson leads the youth ministry at his church.
The drive behind it is so that I can protect myself and my family. The fact that I also work at the church and serve in that way is just an added benefit.
Many of these trainees say they become more focused with each new mass shooting, and they know churches have been targeted. Most recently this past June, when 9 people during a Bible study were killed in South Carolina.
The shooting at the Sandy Hook Elementary School on December 14, 2012, left 26 people dead, including 20 children. It was the deadliest shooting ever at a U.S. elementary school. The country and the world were in mourning. Many were also gripped with fear. For some, that fear prompted them to buy firearms of their own.
Yes, we had a tremendous upspike at that time. It was the biggest upspike I had ever seen.
Chris Ruger is the owner of Ruger's Customs Guns in upstate New York.
People have a tendency to buy stuff after the fact, prepare for the next time. What do I need to do in order to make myself ready for the next event? Be it a possible shooting.
After Sandy Hook, firearm background checks, an indication of intent to buy, hit a record of more than 950,000 in 1 week. But Ruger and others say the spike is less about the fear of another shooting and more about the fear of gun control.
There was no national increase in firearm sales for 5 days. And then you had politicians come out and say, we're going to ban these type of weapons going forward. And you started a 18-month dramatic increase in military-style rifle sales.
It's a pattern that repeats itself after every shooting, and it's a boon to gun makers. Days after the terrorist attack in San Bernardino, U.S. President Barack Obama called for more gun control. A day later, in anticipation of increased sales, the shares of 2 gun makers, Sturm Ruger and Smith & Wesson, jumped. Smith & Wesson shares are up more than 15% since San Bernardino.
If the federal government decided that or talked about banning toaster ovens, even if you didn't want a toaster oven, you may go out and buy that toaster oven because you're afraid you won't be able to get that toaster oven in the future. So the same thing is happening with firearms at this point.
The president of the Palestinian Authority has sparked outrage in Israel after he said the current wave of Palestinian terror in Israel is justifiable.
President Mahmoud Abbas says Palestinians are acting violently because they have been driven to despair. He says young people are hopeless because of the lack of a potential horizon for a two-state solution. The Palestinian leader also claims that Israel's invasion of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the continuation of settlement building is triggering Palestinian unrest. The president's attempts to legitimize the ongoing wave of Palestinian terror attacks has prompted outrage in Israel. Israeli government spokesman Mark Regev condemned the Palestinian leader's remarks, saying there can be no justification for wanton attacks on civilians. Meanwhile, a new poll in the Palestinian Authority found that 2/3 of Palestinians support the wave of stabbings against Israel. According to the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, 66% of those surveyed in Gaza and the West Bank support an armed intifada.
Prime Minister Netanyahu says Israel will not be defeated following yesterday's tragic car-ramming attack in Jerusalem.
14 civilians were injured after a terrorist from East Jerusalem plowed his car into them. The attack took place at a bus stop in Jerusalem. A 15-month-old baby was among those badly hurt. the terrorist responsible for the attack was identified as a member of the Hamas. The Israeli Prime Minister has condemned the current wave of car rammings, stabbings, and terror attacks carried out by individual attackers. Netanyahu also praised security and medical forces who have quickly responded to terror attacks and saved lives.
US Secretary of State John Kerry is in Moscow with a busy schedule in front of him. He's here to see President Putin in the Kremlin over the situation in Syria. At the moment, he's actually in talks, though, with the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
The world benefits when powerful nations with a long history with each other have the ability to be able to find the common ground. And today, I hope we can find some common ground.
John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov are no strangers. In fact, they have met 20 times this year alone.
Certain truth for reports that Russia is looking at.
Победа диктора. It started something like that, 1953.
The Russian Foreign Ministry says the visit was organised at the urgent request of the White House.
Together, we're looking for ways out of the most urgent crisis.
Both you and President Obama have committed yourselves to trying to develop as much as possible through Foreign Minister Lavrov and me an approach that can try to deal with both Ukraine and deal with Syria.
Well, Russia has criticized Turkey and the United States for their failure to inform the UN Security Council about oil smuggling by ISIL terrorists in Iraq and Syria. Russia's UN envoy, Vitaly Churkin, says that both Ankara and Washington are obliged to notify the UN about the illegal trafficking of stolen oil by Daesh. In an interview with a Russian news agency, Churkin said the two states' silence on the matter is against the UN resolution on financing terrorism. Churkin said, how could American generals not know about such trade despite operating in the area for more than a year?
The Russian Navy has reportedly chased off a Turkish vessel trying to hinder the passage of a Russian convoy in the Black Sea. Now, according to Russian media, a vessel under the Turkish flag crossed the convoy's path while it was transporting gas drill platforms to a new location in Moscow's territorial waters. Reports say that a Russian missile cruiser and a powerboat had to intervene to drive away the vessel. This is the second recent sea incident involving the Russian Navy and Turkish vessels. On Sunday, the Russian Defense Ministry reported that a Navy destroyer fired warning shots to avoid a collision with a Turkish fishing vessel in the northern Aegean Sea. Tensions between Moscow and Ankara have escalated since the downing of a Russian fighter jet by Turkish forces on the Syrian border last month.
Two Turkish members of parliament claim that deadly sarin gas was delivered from Turkish territory to Islamic State fighters in Syria in 2013. They say that officials knew about the deliveries, but that the case was closed. The MPs say that they have evidence to back up the allegation and that they have presented it in parliament. We spoke to one of them.
Bu ham maddelerin yurt dışından
chemical weapon materials were brought to Turkey and put together at ISIL camps in Syria, which was known as the Iraqi Al-Qaeda at the time. We have recordings to confirm this.
It's a national day. It's a national day when we are lighting this tree to tell the world that living together, Muslims and Christians, is possible, and Jordan has become a model. And as it is possible in Jordan, it can be possible in all over the world.